say anyone else who comes in can jump in and join us where we are. I want to be sensitive to people's lunch break here.
Awesome. I'm going to share my screen here. Um, okay. Let me just, it's always the managing of
Right.
all of the windows, but hopefully, are you all seeing the deck right now?
Y- I am, yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I've proven that I can't talk and do this at the same time. So I'm grateful for Lindsay.
It's like that green box, that's around
Yeah.
the screen is like not actually on the screen, but if you tell me you can see it, great. We'll go with that.
Looks
Um,
like looks like folks are good. Awesome.
okay. Great. We'll jump in. Thank you, everyone, for making some time today to be here. I'm Lindsay Green-Barber. I'm the founder of Impact Architects. We're a small company that does strategy and research around media and journalism. We work both with journalism organizations directly and media makers, as well as with foundations that support journalism and media. I am based in Boulder, Colorado now. The team is all remote, but I spent the past 15 years living in the Bay and moved about a year and a half ago. So I'll also just say I was very grateful for this project to get to spend some time learning about and thinking about California again. So I'm just going to do some table setting and talk big picture about our approach and how we ended up in this space with Autumn and with Jessica Maria Ross, who just joined us. And then I'll turn it over to Autumn, who will talk through the kind of top line findings from this work and also the direction for where it's headed. Let's see, I'm also just letting people in as they arrive. Um, Okay, so big picture. Autumn and JMR came to us and said, we want to do an ecosystem assessment in Yolo County. Sorry, I'm seeing chat too. Okay, JMR. And we said, great, that's the thing we do. We have an ecosystem framework. We've been doing these assessments since about 2020. And our goals really are to understand what's happening across a local news and information ecosystem. This is everything from the level of cities or counties, in the case of Yolo County, all the way to state level analyses. We look at a few buckets of indicators or kind of categories. We look at community information providers. So that's kind of first and foremost, that are the journalistic sources of news and information. What are some of their characteristics? Like, what's the business model behind them? What's their incentive structure? What size is the organization? Then we look at community information needs and trust in media. So when and if it's possible, we use pre-existing data to understand, do residents know about local information providers? Do they trust them? Are their information needs being met? Are there different topics that they would like covered more that aren't currently being covered? Um, and then we've added to this framework civic engagement and democracy indicators. If anyone's interested, we have a whole literature review about why and how we know that there is a relationship between the presence of quality, trusted, accurate local news and information and positive outcomes for democracy and civic engagement. And when you take that news and information away, you get negative outcomes for civic engagement and democracy. So we include a bunch of those indicators. And then also we want to look at what's the big picture of a community. So what are the community indicators that we look at? Everything from demographics to socioeconomic status, what kinds of infrastructure are present, like public libraries or universities, or other things that can be part of that connective tissue. So again, this framework has been kind of iterated on for the past 5 years now, and we continue to iterate on it in partnership with EMA. Um, Anything you want to add about the framework overall, Autumn, that I'm
Um, just that this was a pilot project in a way for both Impact Architects and definitely for DMA. Impact Architects has worked with some really big institutions and done this at a state level, and doing it with a smaller organization and at a county level was new for them. And us working with nationally known um, ecosystem experts like impact architects was new for us. So we came together in a spirit of collaboration and experimentation to make this happen. And I think that's notable.
Thanks. The other difference for us was the level and depth of community engagement that happened in this ecosystem assessment due to the partnership with DMA. So we often do community info needs surveys, they're digital surveys that are distributed either directly to community members or through a partner. That's something that we did in the case of DMA. But in addition to that, between Autumn and JMR and the advisory working group, we were able to get so much more texture about what's going on in the ecosystem, particularly for community members. So Autumn had dozens of conversations before we actually launched into this project. And then over the course of about 8 months, I think that we started from start to finish for project implementation, and has, I would assume, continued to have those conversations even post publication. There's also a working group that JMR led. There were in-person and virtual meetings there, and folks across, government agencies, nonprofit groups, and others were able to really bring their expertise and the perspectives of their communities into this work. I mentioned the survey. There were hundreds of responses that we were able to incorporate in to really get a wide perspective of community members in terms of what's going on for them, their information needs. And then there were in-person engagement efforts, tabling, community roundtable conversations, and probably more. But this was a lot of qualitative information to complement the quantitative data that we were using.
Right.
And then I'll just very quickly talk about some of the key findings, kind of especially in the context of this work, nationally, as we kind of see what's unique about Yolo County, and what do you have in common with others. One, we found there to be, significant socioeconomic inequality. So you have like very wealthy, affluent community members, and then there are also many folks who are living below the national poverty line. There's strong public infrastructure assets, so public libraries in particular, but also community colleges. Of course, you have UC Davis. So there's like a lot happening that can be part of the overall information infrastructure that exists in the county. When we looked at specifically journalistic information providers, there's actually quite a lot going on, as I'm sure all of you know, but found that it's quite fragmented. So you have different sources of news and information, some of which is like paywalled. And so from the news consumer perspective or from a resident perspective, it can feel like you have to look around from a lot of different sources just to figure out kind of what's going on across the county on any given day. And that is both labor intensive and can be quite expensive from a resource perspective, especially if, again, you're thinking about multiple paywalls, wanting to support, Substack subscriptions because it's the right thing to do. But it can be kind of a challenging position for a news consumer to be put into. And then finally, there is limited accessible news and information from different sectors of the community. So especially if we're thinking about, immigrant and or primarily Spanish speaking communities was one that was really highlighted as there's an opportunity to think about what kinds of information is needed there and how might local news and information providers really kind of like get in there and work together to be able to make the information and reporting that's already happening accessible to some of these community members. Yeah, I'll kind of pause there. Autumn, if there's anything you want to add to the key findings, but also turn it over to you to kind of walk us through some of the more specifics.
All right. Thanks so much, Lindsay. I want to spend 2 minutes just doing a little bit more context setting about DMA and our work. And before I do that, I want to shout out Ms. Maria Ross, who is on the call with us. She's the mysterious JMR we keep referring to, and she is a nationally known community engaged journalist who happens to live here in Davis. And there she is. Hello. And she has been the kind of the linchpin of all of this. She connected me with impact architects. She has continued to connect me and DMA with amazing resources both in the area and around the country who are doing this kind of work. And so I'm very grateful to her for bringing her expertise and her connections and her ability to really effectively steward the working group and to build do really deep community engagement during this process. So thank you, Jessica. The other thing I want to offer is just a brief overview of Davis Media Access. I haven't introduced myself, but I think I probably know everyone on here, but I'm Autumn Labbe-Renault. I'm the executive director here at Davis Media Access. Just to give you a little context, Davis Media Access is a nonprofit community media center. We've been around since 1989 when we were known as Davis Community Television. In 2004, we started a small but mighty radio station you might have heard of, KDRT, and it became clear that we weren't just about TV or just about one thing anymore. In 2007, we rebranded to Davis Media Access. So we're an organization with a lot of moving parts, many of which don't even take place here at the Media Center. KDRT is here, and we have a television station here, and we have additional production assets we're building out. But we have 4 staffers who really never even set foot here because they are working over at the Brunel Theater on the high school campus recording things. We have other staffers who manage projects, a long-term project out at Woodland Community College where we run their campus media center for them, with them. And as of January, we are taking up the task of recording the city's city council and planning commission meetings. So there's a lot going on. We do a lot of work out in the field, in the community, and Yolo Local is the latest piece in that. The last thing I want to say about that is Yolo Local came about both from my concern and my curiosity, and then I brought JMR in, and the whole trajectory changed. Um, my curiosity was people kept coming to me and saying, I can't find information I need in the community, and that unfolded almost daily over a long period of time. This was starting in 2023. And I got curious about what DMA's um, technical expertise, technical infrastructure, and also our really deep partnerships all over the county. I got curious as to how we might be able to help the situation. And that curiosity evolved into this process that resulted in the report we published at the very end of September, the Yolo County News and Information Ecosystem Report. So, having said that, I'm going to walk through the rest of the slides and tell you what we did, and then I'll tell you what we've been up to since publishing the report and where we're hoping to go with this. Okay, Lindsay. All right, and I invite Lindsay or JMR to jump in here. One of the big things we did is we first of all, with the framework that Impact Architects brought to the process, they have a process of pulling demographic data from a whole bunch of sources. And so if you walk through, we'll just walk through the slide. You can see the age. The first column is the average in the United States, and the second column on the right is how Yolo County stacks up with this. And so you can see that we have a few less over 65. We have a few less under 18, but really we're not that different from the rest of the country. And then you can go down and you can see how it's broken down, how people identify by race and culture. And yeah, I'm seeing a comment in the chat, David. We're going to comment more on the Spanish speaking population as we go on because it was one of the key takeaways. All right. And then we look at the economics and resources. Bear in mind, this was looking at Yolo County. Yolo County has 4 very different cities: Davis, Winters, Woodland, and West Sacramento. We're all very different from each other, and also a large unincorporated area, especially centered around Esparto. The median household income in Yolo County is higher than that of the United States as a whole, as is the per capita income. But if you also look at that, the poverty rate is higher, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And then we looked at educational. I want to say something about the households with computer and broadband access. When I first saw that data, it seemed ridiculously high, knowing we have all these unincorporated areas. But when you dig into it a little bit, what access may mean is simply that they have a phone. And then, in fact, as we went out into rural Yolo County, we really found that most people, that's how they were accessing content, was by a phone. They don't have laptops. They don't have, they may not even have a TV. They don't have iPads and that kind of thing. So that's a that's a figure that bears a little bit of explanation, I think. Okay. All right. So Lindsay was talking about the civic engagement markers and how they are connected to the availability of news and information. So 61% voted in the 2020 general election, and that figure has been climbing steadily. DMA was part of the Yolo County Voter Education Project, and uh, uh, that was geared at getting voting information out to underrepresented and underrepresented districts within Yolo County. Charitable giving is higher than the rest of the US, but it's still low. Lindsay, do you remember the percentage of that? Was it about 1%? It's still pretty
Yeah,
low.
it
Yeah,
was 1%.
about 1%. Yeah. And we learned that city and county governments make materials accessible. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later too. But what that means is, in general, the cities post their agendas, they post minutes from the meetings, they notice the meetings, and in several cases, they are recording the meetings and making the recordings available. Okay. Information providers. Yeah. So to be clear, these are information providers that are based in the county. There are others around the greater Sacramento area that may in some way serve Yolo County, but they're not based here. And one of those examples is a place where we actually did significant outreach, which is Radio Santissimo in Sacramento, but they're not based here in Yolo County. And so you'll see Impact Architects went ahead and clustered these as the independent and for-profit on the left-hand side. And that is, they're classified, are they print or digital only, print only, et cetera. Newsletter, that's a grouping for Substack. It was hard to know how to categorize that at this point. There are no national broadcast chains here. We are part of the greater Sacramento media market. And then moving on, we have newspapers that are under corporate ownership, and that includes the Woodland Daily Democrat, which is owned by a hedge fund. I just want to note that. And we have local, the McNaughton family owns the Davis Enterprise, the Winters Express, and they own another paper in Fairfield. And then we have the West Sacramento News Ledger in West Sacramento. There are a couple of other tools here that are digital only. Um, the Valley Voices is published through the Rise Collaborative. ACES Too High is an online newsletter for the ACES resilience community. We have the People's Vanguard of Davis, which is well known here in Davis. We have our projects, Davis Community Television and KDRT, and we have KYWS, which is a recently started low power FM radio station in West Sacramento. And then we have our student news outlets. And of course, it's worth noting that public media in Sacramento has a really high subscriber base that comes from Davis. But again, those weren't based in the county, so we didn't classify them here. Okay. Local information needs and trust in news. So earlier, okay, let me come back to that thought. This was very interesting. And this top line here, word of mouth. More respondents get their news via word of mouth, social media, or local social networks than any platform. That was really borne out as we went out to Winters, for example, and did bilingual outreach to the community there. When we went out and talked to people, we were asking them, what kind of news and information do you use? Who do you trust? How do you wish the news was covering your community? and what are some of the ways they're not. So we asked some questions that got them to open up, got people to open up and talk to us. And I can't tell you how many times I heard word of mouth. I heard it from my neighbor. I hear it at my workplace. I hear it in the cafe I frequent. It was just an amazing proportion of people. So that's really telling about how our once common of having daily newspapers where we were all getting our news from the same place has really kind of faded away, and other things have taken its importance. Social media, um, that was really broken down by age. People 50 and older were very into their Facebook community groups, events in Winters, events in Davis. That's where they went to find out what was going on. Um, Local social networks. Still a fair number of people getting information from local newspaper, local government agencies or officials. Tara Thronson is here from Supervisor Lucas Freric's office, and I want to point that out because I've had conversations with both of them about if you get a Yolo County Supervisor's newsletter, it is chock full of information, and in they've told me that they do that because they have so many people coming to them asking questions about what's going on. Um, Anya, I just saw your question, but it blipped out for me. Let me come back. Let me come back to the questions. Um, we did talk to, I think what you're getting at, we did talk to people of all ages. What we heard from younger folks is that by and large, they got their news and information from TikTok, from YouTube, and from Reddit, um, and kind of in that order. What we heard from folks in the in between ages, maybe 30 to 50, is that it was a mix of all those things, and in some cases that they were just tuning out because it was too hard to get information. Earlier, Lindsay talked about the socioeconomic indicators, and what we heard repeated over and over again is, I don't have time or money to subscribe to all these different things. It's really frustrating for me to have to go to the Vanguard for political news and to go to, the Davis Dirt for entertainment news and to read the supervisor's newsletter to find out what's going on in the county. So, um, so it was mixed, and it was surprising to me that podcast featured so low on the totem pole. I honestly expected them to be higher. So it's a mixed bag finding out. Okay, Lindsay's sharing a file too that gives you a little bit more information. Given our
Yeah,
time, I think we'll keep moving through this and maybe take questions at the end. You can help me surface them from the chat. Okay. Yeah, really the big takeaway that was that about 17% of people still they told me, Autumn, I want to hold a print newspaper in my hand. I will say overwhelmingly those were people probably over the age of 65. Um, we heard from different populations that the best way to get news to me is to create the news and then send me a link on WhatsApp so I can open it and listen to it or read it. And so those are things that we're going to need. The delivery mechanism are things that we're really going to need to explore all the way around. Um, Again, word of mouth is still in there as in this demographic spread here. Email, podcast, other, radio at 7%, television at 9%. So you can still see that it's online content that is really driving most people, whether they're connecting in a Facebook group or they're reading a news website or app or blog or Substack. I would put all of those under there. Okay, this is where we really started to get into some great information. So the Latino, and I'm going to use Latino here, but some people identified as Hispanic, Latino, Latina. I'm going to use Latino as the generic. Um, Really told us that they tend to prefer getting their local news from social media and television. And television in that case meant some of the things in the Sacramento market, Spanish language channels. whereas those who identified as non-Latino prefer news websites or apps. And you can, the bottom has the numbers, and you can kind of see how those numbers are quite different for the two groups for the most part. All right. This is really, I mentioned that my curiosity got piqued when people started calling me or emailing me at work saying, God, I'm really struggling to navigate this website, or I can't find this information. And by and large, there is this feeling that there aren't enough local sources in my area. But I have to say, anecdotally, out talking to people, I also heard this: it's too expensive. Um, and that frustration of I don't have the time, I don't have the personal bandwidth to map everywhere I need to go to track down what I need to be an informed member of my community. There aren't enough local news sources in my preferred language. We're going to dig into that a little bit. And then again, at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale, technological barriers, no internet connection. They don't have a device. They don't have the bandwidth, literally. Yeah, this was we pulled quotes from some of the many one-to-one interviews that I did, and I think I mentioned this already, but this was a refrain, and it's a source of frustration for people. Lindsay, could you help me out with this one? I feel like you have a better handle on that.
Yeah, of course. Um, so this, I kind of I dropped in the chat. We did look at age group differences, but they weren't that significant actually across respondents. But when we looked at those who identified as Hispanic and Latino versus don't, that's where we saw really big differences in responses. So Adam talked about just the type of platform or like the way people prefer to get news and information, but also we asked about how important different topics were to people's everyday life. And you can see in this chart here for people who do not identify as Hispanic and Latino, you just get the ranking. So order of importance, not necessarily magnitude of respondents, but overall order of importance. On the right-hand side, people who do identify as Hispanic or Latino, the ranking. There are some things that I would say that are kind of unique to Yolo County, like local activities, arts and culture being ranked as the most important topic. I've never seen that before, actually, these surveys that we've done or that I've read somewhere else. So like that's really interesting to me. It probably says something about the respondent pool also, but still worth noting. Government and politics is always pretty high up there. Crime and public safety is pretty high. And you see that it's the same across both of these self-identified demographic groups. Then we start to notice some differences. So if someone identifies as Hispanic or Latino, the fourth most important topic was jobs in the economy, which was number 10 for people who are not Hispanic and Latino. That might look different today than this survey was fielded, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, off the top of my head, I think it was like June through the beginning of September of last year. No, the timing's wrong.
Roughly in May through
It was
August.
it was the
Yeah.
fall. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like that might even have shifted in the time, but still it tells us that some folks are thinking much more about jobs in the economy than other folks. Um, Interestingly, like weather, people are always like, weather, why is that even on the chart? In some cases, we use it almost as a control because it's almost always like one of the more important things and one of the only areas where people say the type of information they get is sufficient. Like they get enough information about the weather. And so we can like test the responses. Like if people don't think they get enough weather information, we would question the results overall. But you can see it kind of falls in the middle of the pack for people who are not Hispanic or Latino, a little bit lower for people who identify as Hispanic or Latino. Same like obituaries, a little bit higher for non-Hispanic, Latino, lower. And immigration stories are that kind of coverage is more important for people who identify as Hispanic and Latino than those who don't. So like there's some logic, you can kind of understand what this says, but it's just interesting to see how it shakes out. I'll say the obituaries one in general is you like here on the part we work with a lot of newsrooms, we often hear like people come to us for like things like obituaries. People rank it actually as like really low in importance. And I think it's one of those, like, it's low in importance until it's important to you in a moment. And then it feels really important. So I will just flag, like, this is, it's in line with where we see these kinds of results overall. So other than this local activities, arts and culture as being exceptionally high, everything else more or less kind of shakes out with what you might expect.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Yeah.
So these numbers are interesting because if you add the bottom two together, more people don't think or they're unsure whether they have access to trustworthy news than those who think that they do. And I think that's pretty telling. So that's a big part of why we're here and trying to figure out where we go from here. Okay. So in the survey, um, Impact Architects asked all these questions about what the most important roles for local journalism was. So, um, give me information. You can see what ranked as very important was accurate information, holding leaders accountable, reporting fairly. And then it goes down there, connect me to my community, are created, 39% are created by people who represent the population of my local community. I'm going to ask you to just kind of tuck that away in your brain for the moment. Um, Present different perspectives, explore solutions. Are entertaining was way down at the bottom of the list. And then you can see how those numbers stack up. So really information about emergencies, that was at the top of the pile. And if you think about, I'm going to use what happened in Esparto with the fireworks explosion. It happened on a weekend, and I ended up spending the entire weekend on social media, sort of reporting out on that, because at that point, no, there was one story from a local paper, and then it didn't, because of their publishing schedule, nothing got published until the following week. And then one of the Sacramento TV stations came in with their helicopter and got a journalist on the ground, and they did a really great job covering it. But in that moment where everyone was trying to get information, nothing was immediately available. So thinking about emergencies, right? I'm going to just mention the pandemic, which was a protracted emergency and situation that we were all going through. And that was a role that I stepped in to do countywide reporting on COVID-19, because there wasn't one central place that was seeking to get the perspectives of everyone around Yolo County. And that was the role that DMA filled in that moment. So I've held this idea about emergencies and just baseline community information. What do we need to know today to navigate community? I've held that very close to me during this process. And it is interesting. People, I heard, again, anecdotally, talking to people that um, they're feeling like the quality of reporting that is available isn't very good, and that it's really not doing that thing that 65% of people said is really important, which is holding leaders accountable. So
One thing I might just add here
yeah,
on holding leaders accountable, people say it's really important for journalism to do that. Government and politics was the second most important topic that people want coverage about.
right.
And when people inside of newsrooms see these results, that looks pretty consistent across the board. But what we often hear is, well, people say that, but they don't read those stories. And like, this is about people trying to perform well in surveys and blah, blah, blah. Like, there's certainly, I'm sure that's a part of it, but I think there's also people know the role that media and journalism plays. And again, I talked at the beginning about connections to healthy democracy, to civic engagement. Like, we know that having healthy local information holds leaders accountable. We
Right.
want there to be government and politics reporting and coverage when we want it, or when there's an important issue. And again, to know that it's there. So just because those stories don't get the highest page views or aren't the most widely read stories, that doesn't mean that they don't provide a value to residents and that people don't know that it's important and don't want it to be there. So
Yeah.
just like in
Yeah,
case
thanks
anyone was
so much,
thinking that.
Lindsay. Yeah, and actually I had many people say to me some version of this. I know local meetings aren't sexy, right? But I don't have time to go to them. I know important decisions are made there that affect my life, my property values, my neighbors, my schools, etc. I would like to know what happens at that. And I would like accounting that isn't just a laundry list of what they discussed without any critical analysis. So over and over again, people really identified public meetings as important. Okay. So again, this ties in and kind of amplifies what I just said, that they want more factual reporting with more details, that by getting that information, that would help them feel more engaged with the people providing it, engaged with their community as a whole, that they would love to see excuse me, journalists from within their community hired to take part in that process. And they felt that that actually would be one of the things that would increase transparency about how reporting gets done. As a former reporter, I'll tell you one of the biggest things about reporting whoops, is actually being in the room, so that you can ask questions, so that you can clarify the spelling of people's names and clarify quotes and things like that. And when you are just watching it online, which is what most of our local reporters, those who are still around, most of them are watching it online. You don't get to be in the room. You don't get to do those things. You don't see the tensions. You don't see the byplay, and you don't have access to the people making the decisions. So all of those things would help increase transparency. Reducing bias. One of the things we heard as we engaged with, and by the way, when I say we had a couple of bilingual members of our working group who were instrumental in going out and doing bilingual community engagement around the county, Spanish and English. One of the things we heard is we want to see stories about our community that are not salacious, that are not stereotyping, that are not negative. We have many success stories within our community, and we'd like to see them brought forward. And there's no one doing reporting in this community typically that does that. So we would like to see more positive bias when reporting on our community. And then 27% talked about transparency and revenue sources. So I think that part of that is understanding. One of you said earlier, I didn't know the Woodland Democrat was owned by a hedge fund, as is the Sacramento Bee. So, knowing that kind of information is important because it puts a different spin on what kind of information comes out from those outlets. Okay, so really, here are the takeaways. Here are the key takeaways. I knew going into this process that there really wasn't much Spanish language news and information in the whole of Yolo County, where 36% of people identify as Hispanic, Latino, Latina, and almost 20% identify Spanish as the language spoken at home. And what we heard over and over again is, I don't have access to information I need. And we asked them, what kind of information do you need? I need to know when the bus schedules change. I need to know what day the health clinics are on. I need to know where I can apply for jobs. And I really, really need to know what my child's school is asking of me, because I don't really have access to any of that info. So it's a very large percentage of our county that is almost completely underserved. There are two exceptions. One is the Winters Express publishes once a week, and they publish a page in their newspaper that contains Spanish language information. And I mentioned the RISE Collaborative, which is a collaborative of largely social service and community-based organizations serving Esparto and the rural areas of our community. And we did some deep engagement with them. And they publish a newsletter that has a little bit of Spanish language content in it, but it's targeted to their mailing list, and it's once a month. And So that's the whole of the content. So that is a bucket in which we are placing some real energy moving forward. That was a clearly identified gap in our countywide news and information offerings and infrastructure, and it's something we would like to begin filling. And I will, when we get to who we've been talking to and what we've been doing, I'm going to lean into that a little bit more. We also heard Impact Architects did a couple of roundtables with our local media, our local information providers. And one was with legacy sort of newspaper folks, and the other was with newer media, those who do blog and Substack and things like that. And one of the things that came out of those meetings was the need, and this was a surprise for me, the need for a backbone organization that could somehow provide greater coordination between um, between the information providers. We heard things like perhaps we could have a photo pool, or perhaps there could be an assignment editor. With so much information coming down, things get missed. And usually when you think about media organizations, you're thinking about people getting the scoop, and there's sort of a sense of competition there. And what we're hearing is that model may no longer work anymore, and there may be an opportunity for increased collaboration. Um, really covering critical topics as we looked at some of that data, the kinds of things we talked about that aren't getting done, and also being a resource hub, whether that's as a website or something else, where we're constantly highlighting what's available in the county. So there are some real opportunities here, and not sure how many slides we have left, Lindsay. I want to give time for questions. Next steps. All right, we did it. Okay, so let me say a few things about who we've been talking to since the report came out, and then let's leave a little time for Q&A. So leaning into what I said about the lack of Spanish language media, we have applied for our first grant and we have not heard the outcome yet, but we have applied for our first grant that would allow us to begin offering a Spanish language news product the format to be determined. And while we're waiting to hear from that, we've been very busy meeting with folks in that world. We had a meeting with the great folks at Radio Bilingüe, which is down in Fresno and has been around for about 40 years, and they provide all kinds of news and information. They are willing to give us some training. They are willing to connect us with some programming. Just as we get radio programming from Pacifica, we could get some Spanish language programming that wouldn't be specific to Yolo County, but it would be of general interest. We also, we've had some interesting conversations with Crystal Apilado, who's the editor-in-chief of the Winters Express, and are going to begin having some collaborative meetings towards some collaborative programming in January after we get through the holidays. And so a lot of our we also met with Catholic Charities, who does amazing direct community engagement work with the Latino population all over Yolo County, and they want to help us. They're willing to share our information or to have us come with them on some of their outreach activities, which spans everything from promotoras to and the health clinics to food bank distribution. And the woman we talked with, Chelsea McLaughlin, was really phenomenal, and her mindset and how she goes about engaging with the community. So the report is doing some of the things that we really hoped it would. It got people's attention. It made them aware of some of these key findings, and it has them coming to us wanting to have these conversations to engage and to figure out how we can work together moving forward. And that's really exciting. So that's one aspect. JMR and I have also had a couple of really intriguing meetings with with the folks from Abridged, KBIE. They have a Yolo County reporter. And we started a conversation. We're going to continue about how we might be able to work together. Their Yolo County reporter is brand new to the area and could really benefit from some of our relationships, and he might be able to help cover some topics that we're able to identify. So I think a lot of this work moving forward is leaning into the strength of building, strength of collaborations and continuing to build those relationships. I've also had meetings with an organization called Journalism and Design. They are they inhabit a very kind of unique space in this whole picture. They're an organization that has gotten some of the big press forward funding, and they're very interested in connecting community media centers and community colleges, and that could potentially be a really, really sweet spot for us here in Yolo County. DMA is in year 5 of a partnership and a contract with Woodland Community College, where 2 days a week we have a DMA staffer out there who helps them run their television studio and their podcast studio, which they use for a variety of purposes, including training students, including helping faculty produce distance learning programming, and they're also working with folks on a oral history project about the original Latino residents of Woodland, and trying to capture information as an old generation is beginning to really pass away. So lots of other meetings with lots of other people talking about agricultural coverage, talking about additional partnerships. And I would love to stop talking here because I think we have about 10 minutes, and I can't really go into the chat and take your questions, but if you raise your hand, perhaps we could call on you and at least get to a few of them. And what we don't get to here today, I'll do my best to answer after the fact. So. I think I saw a lot of things in the chat. Okay. All right. What else can I tell you, Tara?
Well, I'll just make a comment. Thank you for all this work, and for doing this webinar summarizing. And, I read a lot of reports, but I really appreciate this. And now it's encouraged me to go back and read your report. I love that you've narrowed on a real unmet need in our community and the Spanish speaking local things. And I've actually really enjoyed Abridge since it launched. It has exceeded my very low expectations. And I love that Daniel, there is an assigned person that is in the board chambers here and there and covering important topics that no one else is covering. And frankly, I've learned about stuff in the region that I care deeply about that I wouldn't have otherwise. So I love that you're also partnering with them. And I hope that there's opportunities to not only enhance that work, but like they don't have a Spanish like segment. And so I think that is a real unmet need that I love that you're exploring that, and the other collaborations that you've talked about. So this is hard, right? We're in the messy middle, but I love that y'all are looking ahead and not just, dwindling away, but looking at how do we move forward. Also, I just want to give a shout out to your partnership with Crystal. I love her at Winters Enterprise, and I love that y'all are working together. So amazing minds coming together to see what you can do. So anyway, great work. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for creating this space for us today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do want to note this has been a very, very interesting year to launch this project, given the national context and what's going on with the suppression of journalism and First Amendment freedoms. So there's that. And I will say that anything we do moving forward is really going to be dependent on getting funding for it. And that is a very competitive milieu. However, people are really saying, the feedback we've been getting on the report is, wow, you did the whole county. That's a really interesting approach. We hadn't thought about that. And wow, you have a lot of unmet need in your county. So I'm hoping that those things, work in our favor. Also, I think I was reminded of this when we met with Journalism and Design. There's real power in building an idea collaboratively and then approaching funders, because funders love collaboration. And also having done this work, I've talked to a couple of, by the way, nationally, there's about 1,600 community media organizations, different flavors and, and all that around the country. And there are only a handful who have ventured into this realm, and DMA is the first to really produce, it really is the first to produce this kind of report and to do this level of community engagement. And so we're getting noticed for that. We're getting a lot of positive feedback for that, and it's making us, I think, stand out. I have talked to a couple other centers who did things like started a television show wanting to serve their community, and they're now having to pause 2 years in because they didn't take the time to do the community engagement first. And I was really adamant that all of us, Lindsay and JMR, that you can't really launch something new without taking the time to figure out what people need. And you can't just leave them hanging. You have to report back. So there's this kind of effort. But I've also spent a lot of time the last couple of months going back to people I met with or going back to people who served as funders and telling them, we asked for your time and your attention, and you asked us to share information with us. Here's what we learned. So closing the loop was really a big and intentional part of the process. I'm sorry, it's hard to talk and see what's coming in the chat, so forgive me.
I had a question, Autumn.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for putting this on. This is interesting. I found out a lot about our local news scene through this that I didn't even know. And I'm curious, how will the work, like you identified the problems pretty clearly, and then you have like a grant for one of the proposed solutions, which is the Spanish language media. But
Well, we've applied for a grant.
you applied for it. Yeah. Good luck. I'm curious, how are you going to ensure like a multitude of perspectives are available with this, whatever you're proposing for the other pieces of the local news hub or whatever it is, whatever you're putting together to address the problems? Because I find that you get a few perspectives here and there in media, but like what people are looking for on social media is like these multitude of perspectives, and like how are you going to like analyze that data to be able to come up with something that taps into that spirit of multiple perspectives?
Yeah, thanks, David. To be clear, I don't, DMA is a small organization. I don't think that we can possibly fill all of those needs, which is why having a couple that rose to the top as let's work on these two things. And I think it's proof of concept to a large, we get a grant, we launch a Spanish language project. Once you get a grant for one thing, then you get grants for other things, and you begin to build up the capacity for that. And I'm really, really interested to see what we can do at the community college level, already having a partnership built there, and how we can really lean into students working on some of that, getting a journalism certificate perhaps, and doing that by helping to cover public meetings and community events that aren't getting covered. And so I think if we're leaning into what's not being covered, that automatically helps us begin to diversify the content that's being produced, and we will find our niche as we move along. It's been about 2 months since we released the report, so it's early days still, but it is something I hold in mind, and I don't think DMA is going to be like a general newspaper was, but I think our strength lies in our ability to collaborate, to build upon the widespread collaboration we already have, and to figure out one or two places to start with that we can really make a difference, and just build out from there.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We are close to the end of the hour. I think we have time for maybe one more question. And if we don't, I can get you can save the chat, right, Lindsay? You can save the chat for me. Yeah. And I will circle back with you. But I want to thank you for making the time to come to this today, and your questions and the discussion will help us share this, more widely for folks who couldn't be here. And we're a part of several national organizations, and And I'm being called on to speak at several conferences in the coming year about our work here too. So we'll be sharing it out there. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Autumn. Thanks, Gail.
Thank you.
All
Have
right.
a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Two.
Peace. See ya.